Hello, welcome to a Transformational Talk with Dr Bhatia, that's me, and here we are, the 1st of February, we survived January. And today's talk is all about healthy habits and forgiving addiction. So we're going to look a little bit at our habits, what science, the art and the practice is, and also going to work with habits that don't really help. Now, I'm just going to set the context. I am not an addiction specialist. However, I am a passionate enthusiast in helping people bring out their best. And so by working with our behaviours, it does look at some of these aspects. If there's any doubt, you're welcome to get in touch with me at Humble, but also do communicate with your other healthcare practitioner or your GP if there are any issues that do concern you following this talk. So I'm going to share some slides and here we go. Oops, let's go to the beginning. So today's transformational talk is called Harnessing Habits and Forgiving Addictions. If you want to get in touch with me, just go to humble.info. And I like to usually start my talks with this phrase, which is no act of kindness is wasted. The second part of that phrase is no matter how small. And we're going to look at how small changes can make a big difference, especially to yourself. So if we could be kind and honest to each other and kind to ourselves in this talk, that would be fantastic. So you've met me, you know I work as a GP. You also know that I'm passionate about helping people bring out their best. I work as a health GP, but also work with these organisations, and again you can contact me through Humble. And so my audacious aim for today is that by you having skills and knowledge in how to nurture healthy habits, you can help yourself have a wonderful life. And you'll notice there, wonderful life is a colourful word because it's got the full spectrum of emotions. I'm not just talking about being happy all the time, but having the full aspects of being human so you feel like you're living a full life. And we're going to spend some time connecting, where we'll explore some of the science, the art, the practice, so you can transform that into something that's personally useful for you. And then I'll signpost you to other areas where you can get some support for yourself and those you care for before releasing you. So we'll take some little bit of time out and then come together in an open forum, and that part won't be recorded. If you've got any questions or suggestions, do put your hand up or put it in the chat, and I'll invite you to speak at certain times. And silence is fine. It just means you're thinking. So ready to begin? Here we go. So start with some simple definitions. And so a behaviour is what we do. I give this talk to 10-year-olds in schools, and pardon me, I'm going to be as simple as that because I know if I can understand it, they can understand it, we can all understand it. Lifestyles are the way we live, so it combines our behaviours together, and those impact on our identities. Our identities are entwined with our behaviours. And so here we've got someone in a photo that's exhibiting a series of behaviours. So in bed, having a nice drink, nice and relaxed, and checking her phone. And that gives her a sense of identity as well. Now, those habits, individual habits, are things that happen in a specific context. So if, for example, she was riding a bicycle or a GP consulting, she wouldn't necessarily be doing all those things in those ways. And they're often triggered unconsciously. They're automatic and unconscious. So our environments are profound as well. Now, this is not the Oxford Dictionary definition of addiction, but this is mine. An addiction is a habit, so a behaviour that we often do automatically and unconsciously that doesn't really help. And this is often because it's comforting in the short term. So there are different types of habits that we can have. Now, medically, we often deal with sort of substance misuse and these other more difficult addictions, but I'm going to refer to that in the most generic sense when I refer to them. And so activating is a process that I teach in the medical school. So it's in part of the medical school curricula now, which is all about enabling and empowering someone to be in a state of readiness for change. So this includes working with your neurobiology, your environment, your body, your communication systems. So motivational interviewing would be a perfect example of how we do it, but you also get shaped by your environment. So we'll be talking a bit about those too. So a perfect example of a habit is how we fold our arms. So I wonder if you could just take a moment and just fold your arms without really thinking about it, just the way you normally would. So here I am, just like this guy. Now, interestingly, by simply folding our arms, it actually not only changes our body, but it changes our biochemistry in our minds. So we actually become slightly less resistant to a behavior change or a habit change just by our postures. Now, I'm hoping you might experiment with me and get into a state of activation and try changing something. So the first question I'd be was, would it be all right if we tried something new and maybe it felt slightly uncomfortable, and we'll give it a go, but this could be a fun adventure. So if you're up for it, I would ask you, if you could, to get your arms, see if you can release a bit of noradrenaline with the challenge of folding your arms in another direction. So try folding your arms in the other direction. Have a go. It's a bit awkward. I'm struggling to do it now, but here we go. That's me folded. Oh, there we go. Have a go yourself. And I think it probably feels a bit uncomfortable because changing our habits are naturally uncomfortable. We've evolved to keep habits because they've kept us safe for years, but sometimes they don't help. And it's nice to be able to change. So now I'm going to ask you to try it slightly differently. Try folding your arms in the normal way. And now this time, take your hand that's on the top and rub it against your chest and give yourself a nice hug. Release some nice chemicals in your body. And then see if you can slip your arm in the other direction. And then rest it there. And then taking a nice deep breath in. 2, 3, pause and out. Slowly pause. Give yourself another hug and then say, well done. Well done. When you're ready, we're going to let it go. So what we did is we released a bit of noradrenaline, a bit of threat, a bit of acetylcholine, a bit of meaning, a bit of dopamine, a bit of excitement and sense of progression, and then GABA to help it flick all the way through and give you some space with neuroplasticity for serotonin, a sense of well done. Now see if you can do it the other way around again. So with that hand that was normally there and that you changed over, see if you can pop that on your chest. So the other way around, the other hand first, and then tap the other one through and see how that goes. And so I was going to do it that way around. There we go. And that's me. And we'll let you go. So that's just an example of changing a habit and some of the chemicals we're going to explore and some of the processes we're going to put into place. So neuroplasticity is a way we learn. And when we're under 25, it's really, really fast. It's a really quick process learning habits. When we get a bit older, it gets a bit more challenging. But if you know how to harness those chemicals, you can help harness neuroplasticity to learn virtually anything, including a new habit. Now, designing is where you make it a conscious process. You understand it, you desire it, you plan it, and then you make it happen. So manipulating things is one way of making something happen. There's a finesse word that I like to use, which is facilitating, and that's helping something on its way. And the difference between facilitating and manipulating is when you're facilitated, you can see the strings and pull them yourself. I'll just pause there and let that soak in for a second. Lots of information. Any questions about that so far? If you do, just pop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just be silent and let that information soak in. Excellent. So let's put this into practice, shall we? So I'm just going to show you why your habits matter. Release some of that acetylcholine. So first of all, many of the talks I give look at 4 key habits: how you sleep, eat, or nourish, move, and soothe. And soothe is part of the exploration of habits, actually comforting habits, so they actually help. And we know if you address those 4 simple habits, about 80% of the disease that we see in general practice just wouldn't be there. The list just goes on. And so it's hugely powerful. Lots of the problems we see just wouldn't happen. And as healthcare practitioners, you're inspirational. There's strong evidence that habits and practices of healthcare professionals ripple on to those they care for. Dame Carol Black called them the line manager effect. Monkey see, monkey do. And you're indispensable. These habits will not only influence you, but also those you care for and those in your tribe. And we know that the better you live, the more helpful you can be, the better you can roll together. So from the research and the papers there, your habits do matter. So going to come to a bold question. Would you like to change anything? So with your bit of paper and your pen, could you think about anything that you might like to change? So perhaps a habit that wasn't serving you anymore, or a new habit you might like. Now we're coming out of New Year, so you might have made a New Year's resolution, or you might have done one in the past. Here's some examples of some resolutions that are frequently made. So they relate to those healthy aspects we were talking about before, as well as time with family and to live financially soundly and spend less time on social media and reduce stress from jobs. And quit smoking is another big one that's done in the years too. Yeah, fresh year, fresh start. These are the ones I commonly encounter, which is, you know, to change eating and to maybe change our relationships with technology. But I'm going to just share a little insight for you. If you can, try not, look at the cross there, to, oh, it's not done it, to think of a pink cat. I've done it in the wrong order, pardon me. Try not to think of that pink cat or purple cat. Try not to think of that purple cat. What comes into your head? Naturally, a purple cat. It's because our brains aren't very good at thinking about not thinking about things. So by trying not to eat cookies or trying to use your phone less, if that comes into your mind, all you've done is prompt yourself to think about your phone and trigger those same pathways. So I might invite you, if there's something you don't want to do, could you think about the positive opposite? So if, for example, rather than eating cookies, you'd like to do something else, it might be drink water, or it might be move your body, or it might be spend time with your family rather than go on social media, or go for a walk, or even just ignore me and look out of your window and just notice the tree that's out there. So here you've given yourself a positive aspiration and released a dose of acetylcholine, hopefully because it's meaningful for you. So first thing is, rather than don't thinking about the pink cat, try and think about what you like. So if you've written something you don't want on your piece of paper, can you write down just for now the positive opposite? So for me, I've been struggling with a couple of things, but I might come to those in a minute. I just want to share the next bit here, which is we may have made a resolution. You may have said, I'd quite like to change that. If you come to one of my talks, you know the answer to this. What percentage of resolutions are kept for 1 year? I suspect many of you know already, and often can be a bit pessimistic if you work in medicine. But I'm hopefully going to raise your hopes. It's not 1% or 0%. It's actually a bit higher than that. It's about 5%. So 5% of people keep their New Year's resolutions and they become habits for more than a year. But it declines pretty quickly. So within 2 weeks, it's down to about 70%. Then it goes to lower, lower, and over the year, it's pretty much gone. And the shame of that is that means that about 95% of people learn helplessness. So they don't make new resolutions and they don't really believe they can change. And that's a real shocker. But the good news is, my discovery is if you can be humble, then those rates go up to about 70% again. And that's really nice to know, because then people are thinking, okay, what else can I change? So a simple request is, could you be humble and maybe learn something new and try something different? Now, I have to be totally honest that I have been struggling with some habits that I've been trying to work with as well, and I'm going to share some of those. So pre-COVID, when I first gave this talk, it was about hand washing and how we really struggled, even though I knew it would save lives. And interestingly, I realized that information and good intentions alone did not change my behavior. I was in that 95% who didn't follow through. But then, motivated by COVID, I actually looked at what improves people's behaviors and came across some great books. So Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg and Atomic Habits by James Clear, where he actually kind of gave me a bit of a humbling statement, which is we unreliably raise to our level of intentions, but reliably rest on the levels of our systems, which include and influence our habits. So what's going on around us really matters. So I discovered this statement. It has really strong evidence of increasing people's washing their hands, because you have a statement that's a reminder for you. So I put this on my other office, and it has some jeopardy in it. So people can ask me, it's okay to ask me, did you wash your hands? And since that's gone up, I will wash my hands a lot more. And now with gloves and gowns, we do get it. I wonder if there's anything that you might have tried before that really worked well for you. You know, a habit you really wanted to keep, and you realized that motivation alone wasn't enough. I needed a bit of help. You can remember that and think of, you know, clearly you've done a lot of good habits to get through medical school and get where you are. Could you give yourself a well done for doing that? And we're going to harness some of those skills that got you here. And there might be issues where you're struggling with habits that don't really help. Some people, I tend to call those addictions because they're not really helping. Other people might call them cravings. But the big one for me was actually granola. It's healthy in most settings, but eating a bowl of granola after a busy day at work, you know, you've come home tired, you haven't really eaten enough and haven't stopped. It then meant, from my knowledge of sleep and time restricted eating, that eating late and before bed isn't going to nurture my health, my longevity, and my wonderful life with my family and those I care for. So I had to recognize these things, that I had a comforting habit that didn't really help. That after I had it, I felt a sense of regret. That it amplified. So despite my best interest, it actually got more and more prominent in my life. I found in myself, from maybe just needing to do it once a week when I was a duty doctor on call, I was actually craving it and doing it more frequently. And I actually felt like a victim. I was going, how on earth am I going to change this? This is tricky. I actually felt disempowered by it. And I actually felt embarrassed. You know, not everyone is going to reveal their addictions, but here I am. I've come out and revealed that I used to struggle with granola. But fortunately, I realized that I needed to think of the positive thing that I wanted to do instead, and nourish myself with water in the day, at the end of the day. And I'm hoping that if you've got something that you might be struggling with, you can think of the positive alternative you might want to achieve, which you've hopefully written down now. So if you're up for it, we're just going to explore a bit further by looking and getting a bit geeky with the science of habits. So here we go. Our programming hasn't changed much in millennia. Though our environments have, we are pretty much like this early human. We have a frontal cortex, which helps us make decisions, but most of what we do is unconscious. And for example, when we're young, we're designed to put stuff in our mouth without really thinking about it. It's how we explore the world. And then we counter this stuff. Oh, sugar. And then sugar triggers brain chemicals in us that make us want more. And as a result, we keep eating it and diving our faces into it. That's a perfect example. And that combines our environment with our sensations, and that goes through a process of interpretation, some of which is conscious, so we can influence it, but a lot of it is unconscious and goes straight to actions and then our environment. So I'd often find myself coming home from work in front of the cereal cupboards without even realizing how I got there, and starting to pull a bowl of granola. I wonder if you've ever done that and found yourself doing a comforting habit, maybe like checking your phone, without actually realizing you didn't need to. And here's the really challenging part. It's really helpful to like eat as much as you can in an environment where there's no food. But now we've got ultra processed, hyper tasty foods that our bodies and evolution hasn't designed for. We've got other gadgets like mobile phones, and we've got public transport, which means we don't move so much, and other tech. So it's just being humble and realizing, okay, some of the wiring I've got isn't really designed for our environment. And then when you understand it, you can redesign yourselves and your environment. The best place to start, though, is with forgiveness. So realizing it's not your fault, it's just we're now learning we can do it. You can then potentially say to yourself, with whatever your craving was or your difficult habit, is that we are actually doing our best and we can do better. I'll just say this to myself, I was doing my best with my granola, can do better. Could you do the same? And starting with forgiveness is really powerful. There's profound evidence that forgiveness is the best starting place for any habit change. It includes acceptance, mastery, agency, and purpose. 4 factors in a map of a wonderful life. So those habits that happen all have a sequence. And the forgiveness starts in the setup phase. So if I use an example, and you can think of your example, every habit and behavior has a setup, a trigger, a reaction, action and reaction, and then a time when we do it again. That's how habits start and continue. So I'm going to use the example of an eating habit. So at a certain time, we have primers, so clocks in our brains, in our livers, and in other organs to trigger certain biological changes. So I was triggered to release ghrelin when I finished work because of my brain, and my liver primed itself to eat granola. We then have a setup which is in our environment. For example, if you see something like advertising saying half price or 2 for the price of 1, it will trigger you to think about it. So advertising is effectively selling you stuff you probably don't really want or need until you see it. And then there's the setup of what's in our environment. There I am with my red cupboard with the granola in it. So if the granola wasn't there, I couldn't eat it. And then there was the stress that sets up our biology to crave things. And so I had a tough day on call and I was craving those things. But interestingly, by forgiving, you actually reduce the residual stress, so that becomes no longer there. And then we have the trigger. Boom. So seeing the cookie jar or having the phone notification, or for me, just seeing the bowl, seeing the granola box was my trigger. And then that triggered the action. Nom, 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 chewing on it, which was eating for me. And the reaction was getting a response. So I got some comforting response like the Cookie Monster, which then meant I craved even more. And that's how habits start. I wonder if you could think about your habit, maybe the habit that you don't want or the habit that you do want. But as a habit that you do want, could you think of the setup, the trigger, the action, and the reaction? So here's another example that happens. So inside my liver, there's a body clock that releases chemicals that releases a chemical that drops the dopamine in my brain that at a certain time makes me feel like I might fancy a cuppa. And then there's a trigger where someone says, oh, go on, have a cup of tea if you fancy that. Even though I know at 3 p.m, when my ultradian and circadian rhythms are weakest, having a cup of tea wouldn't be great for me. And then I have a cup of tea. Oh, go on. While I'm having a cup of tea, suddenly the biscuits come in as well. And that's how that pattern can amplify and other habits can knock on. And that's called the habit cascade or anchoring habits. So one thing you might discover is that one habit will follow on to another. And that's why if you anchor a good habit at the start of the day, it can set you up for a wonderful day. So I wonder if you could think of domino style, what habits you might do at the start of the day that could make a profound difference for you in the rest of your day. So one for me is I go outside and I just say hello to the sky, Julie Andrews style. The other thing I do is I have a cold shower in the morning, which not everyone might want to do, but it really makes a difference to me and changes my dopamine circuitry. Have you got something that you could do that sets up your day well? Brilliant. And then I mentioned repeat. So here we are, we've got the setup, tough day in the office, feeling slightly stressed. And actually that feeling of guilt reinforces the likelihood that I'm going to do that same habit again. It's the power of the emotion rather than the direction that reinforces the behavior. And then the trigger, the action, and then reaction. Yeah, which then triggers the setup again. Oops. And this is largely to do with this chemical called dopamine, but there are other neurotransmitters that I've mentioned already. You've probably heard of dopamine from medical school and your work in medicine as well. And so dopamine preceding your event, your craved event, your habit, it actually slightly goes up while you're craving it, but also goes up after you've eaten the cookie or whatever the habit you've engaged with. So when you feel a sense of comfort, you actually get a release of dopamine in your brain as well. So it's often called the molecule of more because it drives our behavior and also reinforces our behavior after the event as well. And interestingly, after the event, we actually have a natural rebound drop in dopamine. So it's a bit like an ECG in some ways, where you've got an action potential. You have a big peak and then you have a drop afterwards, which then triggers the wanting to do it again. And that drop of dopamine is associated with feeling rotten, and also certain times in the day, our body then gets primed. So if I eat a chocolatey snack, for example, at 3 p.m, my body will learn that for at least the next 3 days, cause a dopamine rise and then a big drop to make me crave that cookie or something sweet at the same time. And evolutionary, it's really advantageous. It makes you hunt for things at the right time to hunt for them. The challenge is we live in new environments now where food is available all the time. And that generates that reaction where we actually feel rotten and trapped, like a victim in this cycle. So here's some scary slides now. So dopamine released in certain parts of our brain. So that's the nigrostriatal pathways associated with cocaine release, but also with certain brains with sugar, and also with caffeine. And we've evolved these pathways, but this has been capitalized by millennia by plants who have evolved either synergistically or in a war to actually control our behavior. So by playing with our neuromodulators, that's how the plant kingdom controls our behavior. So they produce sugar and caffeine that is our powerful reinforcers of our behavior to go back and pollinate those plants. And that's why sugarcane and cocoa plants, though they're not needed for being alive, are one of the most valued crops that take up a lot of our farming land. And now we've encountered a new challenge, which is these things, which massively shape our behaviors, particularly when you get a thumbs up like on them, that are associated with scrolling, getting a hit at just the right time to make us reinforce those behaviors. And the scary bit is, though we're pollinators like this bee here, offered a lovely sweet snack, we're not the only eaters at the table. So this, believe it or not, is a plant offering sweet treats to this bee that is actually going to be digested because it's stuck on this plant. So this is a carnivorous plant. And there are other things that feed us that also influence our behavior and that might be feeding on us rather than necessarily just feeding us. So I might be getting a bit political now, but when I go to most major supermarkets, I do see perhaps 1 or 2 aisles of food, and the rest of it is entertainment, priming our behavior. And I'm hoping that by showing you the strings, you can feel facilitated rather than manipulated to enjoy the good things you want from those places, but also perhaps not necessarily buy the stuff like ultra processed foods that won't really help you long term. I hope that wasn't too political, and I hope it's okay to share. And if you've got feedback for me about this, please do let me know, because I'd love to improve what I do. And that you feel facilitated by being able to see. So here's the good news, after the scary bit, is that we can forgive and change. I've been running wellbeing groups at my practice for several years, and I have seen people profoundly change. And it's not that hard. Simply, it's about understanding our neural biology and redirecting them in a new direction. And this is the thing. Our brains are like well-worn paths in a forest. Our neural circuitry doesn't change by being erased. You can't really erase an old memory, an old neural circuit, and an old habit that's in you. But what you can do is rewrite it by like getting off the well-trodden path on a forest where it's worn down, and actually getting your wellies on and venturing out, initially a bit uncomfortably, but going across the brambles and then walking a new path. And then with some tips I can give you, you've actually got some hedge trims, some trimmers with you, so you can actually like lawn mow a new path much, much faster. So here we go. How are we going to redirect these healthy habits? If you wanted one key take home from it, here's a cheeky acronym, is to think of a pear. A juicy, succulent pear. One, it might encourage you to eat more pears, which we know is generally healthier for you. But here's the other thing. These are 4 factors that can influence your habit. So if it's prompted by me giving you advertising or giving you a time of day or a reminder on your phone, if it's appealing, that you feel like doing it, so your heart's in it before you take it. If it's easy, so if there was a pear next to you, that would be much easier than having to go, an extra mile to get to the shop for it. And then if it was rewarding, after you had it, you had a feeling of reward and maybe even release some dopamine at the time. And so these are examples of how I set up my behaviors beforehand that actually did all those things. So I was prompted, it was appealing, it was easy because it was right there, and it was rewarding, the dopamine. Oh, Cookie Monster. But you can redirect them now. So with an eating habit, oopsie daisy, what's going on here? You probably remember that you can set yourself up to feel less stressed by pausing and breathing. It's as easy as that. So pausing and breathing in, 3, and out slowly, that we learnt in our last talk. That releases that GABA, that neurotransmitter, that then gives you space between stimulus and response, so you can redirect your responses and change your neuroplasticity. You also could set up your trigger, so having a fruit bowl available to you rather than the cookie jar. So for me, I hid away the granola, and my wife tucks it away in an office, in a cupboard where I can't get to it easily. The next thing is I have the fruit bowl right there, so if I do fancy it, the fruit is easier for me to go for. And then the final thing is to fist pump, to actually reward your good behavior. Now, this is a lot like our ancestors would have done to pull a pear off a tree, or grab a mango or grab an apple. So this actual process of rewarding yourself, particularly if you can do a little fist pump, actually releases a bit of dopamine. So if you target it and release dopamine at the time where you do the good behavior, or even think about the good behavior, it unconsciously primes your hippocampus to remember and reinforce it overnight, so you are more likely to do it and to be prompted to crave the new behavior in the future. Now, this grabbing a pear behavior is so powerful that people like athletes do it all the time. So you've probably seen a tennis player who does this and grabs a mango or grabs a pear. So I'm going to stop sharing and stop presenting for a second and just ask you if you might join me with thinking about your new healthy habit and think about the easiest first step you could do to do it. And then if you can, just imagine you're one of those tennis players or whatever that's really done well, and reach out, grab that pear and pull it in. Boom! And see if you can feel a little release of that dopamine, that neurotransmitter. I know it's a little embarrassing and it's not very British to do this, but if you practice it a few times, you can actually do it without doing the fist bump. You can do it ninja style. So here we go, one more time. Imagine that activity, imagine the pear, you've done it, grab it and go, well done for trying, and make the boom sound amplifies it even more. 3, 2, 1, boom, yeah! And I'm hoping you can feel a little bit of dopamine just now. It feels good, even trying that. Well done. Thank you for doing it. You now know how to grab a pear or grab a mango or grab an apple, but release dopamine under your control rather than under the control of the advertisers or Facebook or something like that, all of which have worked out how to make you behave the way they want you to. Now you've got it in your own hands. Please do practice anytime you like before the performance. So if you'd like to, just think of something simple. And the more you reinforce your ability to control your dopamine, you can do it. And then you can do it ninja style, just like this. Oh, well done. And then you feel it without even trying. So here's an example. And I'd love you to choose a habit that could really work for you. So if you attended my previous talks, you probably know about a really great habit, which is turning off your phone at least an hour and a half before bedtime. And the good news is, if you set a prompt on it to do it, just a reminder, not an alarm, just a reminder to say, hey, would you like to wind down? You can then give yourself a little dose of dopamine and go, yeah, I did it. Or even just go a dopamine hit for reminding yourself. But I wonder if you could choose a habit you'd like to do. So in the previous talks, we just had a 30-second habit of pausing and breathing. So here we go. In 2, 3. Pause. Out slowly. And 2 more times. And 1 more time. And then release. Such a simple habit releases GABA and accelerates your neuroplasticity and gives you more space to choose your response. Or grabbing a pear, you could practice that new technique. Or maybe eating a healthy snack if you needed to. Maybe drinking water, which was my big one to help me stopping with the granola at the end of the day. Or maybe getting some movement, so literally just getting up from your chair. Even me presenting, I could just get up and do 3 squats while I'm phone consulting. I can still do that. A job done. Even while I'm waiting for the phone to ring, or I've got the circle of doom that happens, when you're waiting for emails to load. Or maybe just spending some time with your family. It might be just telling someone in your family, one person a day, that you care and you think about them, and see if you can get through your whole family in a week. Or maybe ignoring me and just looking out of the window and just noticing nature just for 30 seconds, changing your neural chemistry and coming in again. And remembering, if you want to change a habit, think of the purple cat you want. Don't try and ignore the purple cat you don't want. So I'll pause there and just ask, are there any questions about that so far before we get onto the next phase? Just let that soak in. Cool. So here we go. We're starting our habits. Oopsie daisy. We're setting them up. We're triggering them. We've got an action and reaction. And if it's prompted, appealing, easy and rewarding, it will reinforce it. And most habits take a while to be reinforced. But if you do this particular pathway, they traditionally say it takes about a month or 21 days at least for just repetition to ingrain a new habit. But interestingly, within one night, you will accelerate the process if you release dopamine by rewarding and doing this particular sequence. So a perfect example would be tasting ice cream. So there was a really good question there. How many times does it take to reinforce a habit? Well, here's a perfect example. My kids, when they had their first ever taste of ice cream, they learned that ice cream tasted really good. And then within a day on holiday, they were asking for an ice cream again. So if you can do it in a certain way and reinforce it in a certain way, it will only take one night. But the more you amplify it, the more likely it's to happen. Most habits get entrenched if you make it a regular activity with engagement within 21 days. However, having prompts and reminders will bring you back again, because the challenging thing is you need your environment to reinforce you. Otherwise, you fall back to the old pathway. You remember, you don't erase old pathways. You just rewrite over them. You rewalk over new pathways in the forest. Thanks for that question. Really great question. So how do you set it up? Well, you need it to be possible. You need to happen at a regular time. You need the person. So you're influenced by those around you, for example. Oh, go on, have that extra cuppa. If you tell people, oh, I'm drinking water, or I'm a healthy eater now, that can make a difference, and then they're less likely to do it. There's also the place. So you probably know about the key in the door phenomenon, for people putting the key in the door and needing to go for a wee, or the doctor and the granola phenomenon. So if you change the place you go to, or remove the thing that was tempting out of range from the place, that can make a difference too. And of course, the feeling. We know feelings change our behaviors too. And so rather than feeling guilt or regret, if you can forgive yourself, because you really are doing your best and can do better, it will accelerate that process. So I chose to make water available for me. I decided to set myself a prompt for the time I would drink water. And I'll invite you now, if you'd like to just join me in sipping a nice bit of water. So you reinforce this habit for you and have a wonderful night. Great, great. So we're coming to the next part now, which is then the trigger. So this is the thing that prompts you to do the behavior. So here the example was the person. I invited you to take a toast with me. Now the trigger could also be your mobile phone, or a wristwatch that could be a reminder, or it could be that prompt. Do you remember the piece of paper that I had to remind me about washing my hands, by saying it's okay to ask me if I've washed my hands? So feel free to put a prompt in the environment wherever you would like to do that behavior. So you've already written that piece of paper. Could you think of where you could put that sticky note? And you can use one of those ice stickers and just put that somewhere, just reminding you that you'd like to do that behavior. So I've actually in the past, when I was having a really tough time, put pause and breathe on my toothpaste. So when I woke up in the morning and before bedtime, I would simply pause and breathe. And then I know I'd made a good start to the day. And we know it needs to be easy. So if it's an action you can do in less than 30 seconds, like pausing and breathing, like getting up and taking a few steps. So I'm just going to do it now and just take a step with you, because I know I'm desk working, which is not going to be brilliant for me. I know if I get prompted, I can do this in 30 seconds and suddenly I'm a healthy mover. I move freely and I'm an athlete. So could you simplify your habit, the thing that you'd like to achieve, to the first step that would only take 30 seconds to do? So a perfect example where I've helped someone go not from couch to 5K, but couch to half marathon, is to actually simply put the trainers on. So this person put the trainers, they set them up. So her trainers were by our front door. And then her job was to put her trainers on every day on the school run and then run back to her car. That was it. And then she'd done her first bit of running. And then if she had a bit more time, she could run past her car and keep going. as far as she wanted to. And then that became her natural habit. Could you think of something that you could do that was prompted, that you could do in 30 seconds as the first step? And you know that the first step is one of those anchor habits that would knock on to the others. Do you remember I was talking about the habit cascade? And even if you just put your trainers on, that's enough. That's the first step, and you're much more likely to go on. But when you've done the first step, that's the best head start. So my perfect example was to have a water bottle right here in front of me, so I was more likely to drink. And then my first step to being a healthy eater was to just literally sip some water. So here I am, I'm prompted again. Little sip of water for me. And then rewarding. Remember that dopamine. If you want to accelerate it so it gets reinforced when you're sleeping at night, use dopamine. Take it in your own hands, grab a mango or grab a pear. Go on, just give yourself a little well done for trying even the first step, because that will reinforce it. It becomes part of your identity then, someone who tries and shows up. And even the smallest thing that you do on the toughest day is going to be part of your new identity. So if you could, after you've even just tried, even if you've not done the whole thing, could you give yourself a well done just for trying? Well done. And if you can grab a mango, you get the dopamine release, which we know when you go to sleep, your brain runs through the neural pathways of that new behavior. Interestingly, it does it in reverse, but it runs over them, reinforces and myelinates them. So that accelerates the habit by at least 300%. So a 300% acceleration if you can grab a mango or say well done just for trying. So here's the example. Set up. Okay, here I am in this phase now. Here you are set up now. You're going to have your trigger, your prompt that's going to happen. Then you'll have the action, which hopefully is appealing. It's easy. So that one. And that's my easy, appealing habit, sipping some water, prompted again. And then happiness, reward. Well done, Dr. Bhatia. Well done, you guys, for giving it a go. And that means you go through this cycle and accelerate the process. And the example I gave you was pausing and breathing. And if you wanted to deliberate between these two, we know that has more appeal, more sugar, more advertising. But if you want the glass of water, then we're going to work with those skills. Pausing and breathing actually gives you more resource. So I'm going to invite you to think of your new habit that's prompted, easy, appealing, and reinforced. And then just take 3 deep breaths into your nose. In, 2, 3, out slowly. We'll just do it together. So here we go. In, 2, 3. Pause. Out slowly. In, 2, 3. Pause. Out slowly. And one more time. And out slowly. Shake it off and say, well done. Pausing and breathing. It's one activity you can do in 30 seconds that suddenly gives you the space to choose between stimulus and response, the habit that will actually help. So we're coming to the close of this talk before we come to questions and suggestions. But if I could remind you, no act of kindness is wasted. Every little step counts, and no matter how small, especially to yourself, and that will impact on those around you. So I hope you can be kind and be gentle. This will hopefully help you have a wonderful life. We spent some time connecting, got some science, got some art, got some practice. So I'm hoping you've got a small habit that you can put into practice, and then support yourself. And if you'd like to, you can get in touch with me at humble.info. I'd love to hear from you and how it's going. And then if you want further support, you can come and join me on the 8th of March for the next talk, which is actually about insomnia and supporting sleep, because it's World Sleep Week. So not talking so much about the science of sleep, which I've done in my previous talks, but more talking about insomnia. And then have some time to release before we now have an open forum. I'd love to hear your questions and suggestions, because you definitely bring out the best in me. And I wish you a wonderful life. All the best, and I'll stop recording there.